I believe the 35th in our New Tomorrow Community Conversation webinar series. We're really pleased to have you all here today to discuss this topic, this diversity in design. We've got an awesome panel ready for you this morning, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Kathy Wagner. She's going to tell us what we're going to talk about today and introduce our next speaker. Kath?
Hi, everybody. And thank you again for being with us. Zach, thanks for managing this for us. I'm really excited about today's panel. This is a little divergence from some of the normal topics we talk about. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about social equity, about engagement, certainly about leadership, about business, about partnerships. Today's session is really going to be about the why of why it's a good idea to celebrate diversity and bring more diversity into our design process, starting with our selection of consultants and contractors and vendors, but also looking at outcomes in that area. What might our designs in the broadest sense look like if we had greater diversity on the input side? So to me, it's about inputs and outputs. It also brings together, even though it's a new, different format slightly, it brings together some of the work we have been doing during the entire month of February in social equity and some of the business operations sections we've done, and also some of the leadership. So it really integrates all this. It made me think when we were talking with Anna, and I wanted to thank Anna Hernandez, our first panelist, for the brainstorm about putting this together, but it also made me think about why diversity might be a good idea or is a good idea, and how it might help us if we think more broadly with other vendors, not just on the design side. What might your retail experience look like if you had different kinds of inputs to that selection process? What might our food and beverage selections look like if we thought more broadly? So to me, it has a lot to offer us. We have about 130 people signed up for this session, so it is one of our largest. We welcome you all. There are a number of designers, design firms in the room or coming into the room, as well as some people from outside the zoo and aquarium biz. So we certainly welcome you all. Just a word of logistics. We'll start off with a little bit of background to frame what our audience looks like, what the design profession looks like in terms of demographics. We'll give you 3 thought questions to think about as our panelists are speaking, and they'll be addressing these within their sessions. And then we'll turn things over to the panel. So we'll introduce the panel in a couple minutes. I'm going to give you a little background, but I do just want to thank very briefly Mariano Des Morales and Ana Hernandez and Dean Watanabe for joining us today. You'll hear more about them later. So let's look at some demographics here. And Anna, thank you again for putting these together. The statistics might not surprise those of you who are in the business, but it certainly surprised me when I saw this slide, especially when we consider that the color of our profession in the zoo, aquarium, and nature space in general is slowly changing, very slowly changing, that only 2% of the certified people in this profession, in this design architectural registration board, are Black. That was probably the biggest surprise to me. 5% Asian American, 1% Hispanic or Latino. We have a very long way to go here. I don't know how this compares to your understanding or expectations, but to me it says we have some pipeline work to do, as well as some understanding of what's out there. Let's take a look at our audience though. Here's a little different perspective. Remember those tiny little representations of Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and Black design professionals. When we look at some of this, this is impact data that Anna pulled for us, or Zach pulled for us, that looks at the cultural sector in general. And the orange bars, being the total US population, the dark blue bars being the cultural sector, and that's visitors to attractions like museums, zoos, aquariums, et cetera. We tend to be overrepresented, white, non-Hispanic. That's not a bad thing. and it is not at the expense of other segments of the population, but we do have a way to go within our field to create more welcoming experiences, perhaps more culturally appropriate experiences for a lot of other audience segments. And it's not just about being right. We understand that having a greater understanding of different cultures, inviting different people in, makes us richer, richer literally, and richer culturally. So this is just, again, to set the background. This is not about demographics, but it certainly is food for thought. Let's go on and take a look at the questions there. We talked about how diversity and inclusion might affect design, either your choice of a design professional or your input into that process. So questions for not only the design professionals, but those of you out there who are on the owner's side, like Dean. How does your identity impact the design process, no matter where you're coming from? How does supporting minority and diverse design firms benefit your organization? We all know that, yes, it's the right thing to do, but I certainly hope that in the last month, at least through our webinars, we've talked about the multiple benefits of being a more inclusive society and more inclusive field. And finally, and I hope you'll be as excited as I was when I saw some of the slides that you'll be seeing. What are some examples of when your diverse identity, ideas, and lived experiences improve something you worked on? So not only, again, from the designer's perspective, but from what you as a consumer, as a visitor, and as an owner can bring to this process. Just food for thought. We're going to move on. And on the next slide, I'm going to turn things over to Anna. So if we'll just pull up the panel slide. And there we go. I've asked Anna to introduce the panel sort of officially. And I also asked Anna to share a bit of her personal story. Anna and I worked together on a project a little more than a year ago. And we just happened to have a glass of wine together, just saying. And she told me how she got into this field and a little bit about her history. And I think it kind of frames the conversation. So Anna, if you want to kick things off and tell us your story and introduce the panel, we'll get going. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Kathy, thank you so much. Well, I'm Ana Hernandez. I'm from Colombia. I'm an architect, and I opened my company, AFH Design, in 2007. And prior to that, I worked at the Cali Zoo for 10 years. I was the architect there. And, you know, I had a very, very successful career. I had a great time there. I was recognized in my country as an architect. I got in a lot of magazines and publications. And when I decided to move here, I knew that I will change that a little bit, and I will go from somebody to nobody. And that's, you know, that's what I did. In 2007, I opened my firm, AFH Design. Decide to start with, you know, this adventure, and we do master planning, exhibit design, and interpretation. And I thought, well, here I go, and I start knocking a lot of, you know, doors, trying to find opportunities, and you know, it was tough. Not many doors open up, but I had one person that believe in me and give me the chance, and that was it. That was the start of my career here in the States. And you know, I'm always be grateful to that person. You know, just as a something to think about for everybody in the panel, and everybody that is here with us today, is, you know, always give a chance to somebody that have a funny accent like mine. You will be surprised. You might gain a very talented, very good person for your team. So be on the lookout to, you know, be that chance for somebody. So that's a little bit of who I am and my story. And I wanted to introduce the panel. And I want to introduce Mariano. Mariano, hello. And so we've been talking a lot about, what he does, and it is very, very exciting. So thank you for being with me in this adventure. And Dean, we're partners in crime in a new project that we're working together. So I know Dean as a person that I work for, but also as a friend, and also as part of the diversity committee for AZA. So that I wanted to also have the perspective of the client, and I think he's a great person for that. So here we go. So it looks like I'm going to share my screen, and so I'm gonna start. The first question the Kathy gave me, which so this is the how my identity impacted the design process. And I want to start from the beginning. Back in 2007, when I decided to open my business, I had a friend of mine that is a graphic artist, and he works for creating branding for a lot of companies. And then we collaborate in this. And what did I want to be? And for me, it was important to my brand to represent who I am and where I come from. So that's why my logo has a lot of elements of, pre-Columbian artwork, and that's what I do. And I'm very proud of where I come from, and I want to make sure that everybody see that. And everybody have a story, and that this is mine. And we're going to talk about stories a lot in this presentation. So I want to start there. And so growing up in Colombia, is a country with basic needs for many people in the population are not met. And working for the zoo for 10 years, it was for us competing for the same resources that other people was competing. So it makes me really aware of responsibility of money. And as a designer and be in charge of designing construction for the zoo, I want to make sure that I was very responsible with that, with the cost and the budget. So that's something I carry a lot in every project I do, because it makes me very aware of that. And so this could be it could be a constraint, but also an opportunity. And I don't believe that you have a small projects or big projects. I believe in the best idea for a project and a creative way to develop it. And so as one strategy that came out of this was the use of local and natural materials, because it was a good way to make the projects more naturalistic, but also it was a good way to save some money. So I found that. So that's something that I always look at when, every time I work projects to find local resources. And also as a great way to contribute to conservation, because the use of renewable sources sometimes offset the impact of some materials. So construction materials, the impact they do on the environment. So growing up in Colombia, which is a rich country, is very rich on animals and plants, and also diversity, cultural diversity. And there's a lot of group of people that have very interesting ways how animals and people interact, and even how they call the animals. We speak the same language, but they call it different way in different regions, which is very interesting and really hard. So these stories and that interaction of people and animals and plants and the environment is what I think that I treasure the most. And those stories are the one I bring you know, the desire to dig deep in those stories and what it is behind those stories is what I bring to every project. If I'm working on a project, for example, for Australia exhibits, I want to make sure that I dig really deep in those stories that tie humans, animals, and plants, and find the creative way and make the design of the exhibit reflect that. So, so an interesting thing here, the question is how supporting minority design firms benefit your organization. So I think it's now you see many zoos and aquariums and other organizations are really looking for, you know, and committed to diversity and inclusion. And I think that also there are many zoos and aquariums that want to attract new communities into the zoo or aquarium or another organization. And that's where, you know, a minority firm can help you with that, because we can be that connection between that community you want to bring with the stories that, you know, make that community feel represented. And so I think, you know, as a minority firm, and I know many of them, you know, we bring new perspectives, new stories, and that can relate to new people. So when we can ask, why does your organization wants to hire a minority firm? And I think that, you know, you want to promote social change, and that's good. But I think you have to be open and to expect more than that. I think that you will be surprised of the different perspectives, different ways how we can approach problems, and different views of how to solve problems. So be always open to those things. And the last question was, what are some examples of when your diverse identity ideas and life experience improve something, you work on it? So what resonates with me the most is to try to be very careful on how I tell the story, and so you know how many exhibits don't dig deep into the stories. And for example, you see many, you can see some exhibits that they, for example, for South American species, that they have a background like a pyramid or some architectural element that will give a visitor the idea where the animal come from. But if you decide to go that route, then you really, really need to tell the story about what you're trying to represent. It's not just the background of the animal. I think it's just, you gotta tell the whole story and why those elements are important for people. I think that's a good way to also, you know, that can be also a good learning opportunity for other visitors at the zoo. And this project, for example, I work with the Cali Zoo. We wanted to talk about the Andean forest. And the Andean region is where 70% of the Colombian population live. And it's also one of the most biodiverse areas in the country. And we want to, you know, make sure that all the architecture that we did for this exhibit, are in this project will be have some elements of things that will be familiar with the visitors, things that they can identify with. So for example, the floors is the same type of floor you can see in your house or something, because they are part of the story, because they share that same space with, you know, they share that same space with the animals. So we want to have them be part of it. So that was very, very key for that. Also, we want to have these windows to the forest. So every viewing area for the exhibit has the same concept. The goal of this exhibit was to try to find that, you know, the visitor find that sustainable way to live and share space with the animals. We don't want them to compete with that. We wanted to each one to live in a sustainable way. So once you have a good story, that's the key for every project. And that's something you can be reflected in not only in the interpretives, but also in the architecture. I'm currently working with Dean and the Fresno Chaffee Zoo team for the interpretive project for the Kingdoms of Asia. This is an exhibit that will open later this year. And in Fresno has one of the biggest Southeast Asia populations in the country. And the zoo invited cultural advisors and also members of the community to, give us some input and give us some, give us a story about them and what it was important for them and what they would like to see in the exhibit. And that helped us a lot to our team to, make sure that we have references to things that are important for that community. So one little thing that I remember we had that conversation, it was they want to come to the zoo and see the name of the animal in their own language. So things that are very simple, but they are very meaningful. So we find ways to, incorporate that in the species ID, for example. So I think that when they visit the exhibit, when it's open, it will have that, that meaning for them, and also for the rest of the community. So I think as we try to know everybody else cultural background, I think that will make us a little bit more tolerant to share the same space. And so as a conclusion, I think as diversity in design is important because having a variety of perspectives on the table throughout the design process allowed us to design more inclusive experiences for a broader audience. So thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay,
Okay.
so I gotta switch here and I'm going to introduce Mariano. So Mariano Des Morales is from Puerto Rico. He's the creative director of museum environments. He's an architect and a graphic designer. He is specialized in design for museums and branded environments for companies and institutions around the world. For the last decade, Mariano has been testing ways that design can advance inclusion on audience developed for museums. He has designed numerous bilingual and bicultural exhibits. He's on board of many museums, Museum Association of New York. He's leading a campaign to increase the membership of Latinx museum professionals. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Ana. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank Ana for inviting me and Zoo Advisors for hosting this opportunity to speak on a subject that I'm very passionate about. I've been doing this I've been designing exhibits about over 20 years, and I'm particularly in doing bilingual and exhibits for different specific demographics for now a number of years. I would say at least 7 years at that. So my presentation is organized around the questions, but I always give examples. So you will see a lot of slides of examples. I'm a designer, so I think through pictures and images, and I answer them in sort of, I might turn and twist the question a little bit and sort of to fit my experience a little bit better. So all right, here we go. You're all seeing my slides, right? I understand. So with the first question about.
No, we don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it?
It's black,
Nope.
black screen.
But
Oh, I'm sorry.
We did a minute ago. We saw the,
Okay.
there you go.
no, we see it.
There.
Got it.
There. You see it?
Yep.
Now we
Yep.
do.
Okay. All right. Good. I mean, there's always those technical glitches. All right. Okay. Regarding the first question about identity, I want to sort of get into what it means to me in identity, and how and I find myself very much that I find it's a very fluctual space that you have several identities and that you're always sort of working through them out. And inside there's a conversation that happens, and that's who your identity is. And I'm inspired by this mural from El Paso from a Latino artist there. And he actually does something about the Latino immigrant experience. In this mural, he actually puts up a fence. El Paso is right at the border between the United States and Mexico. And there he puts a slew of characters. Some are historic, like the Zoot Suit, but what's curious to me is that they're on the fence, and that is a space itself. That in that kind of fluctuation of cultures, that they live out in that space in their own. And I kind of share with that. Here I made this sort of crazy Venn diagram of like what my own identity is. And so I'm from Puerto Rico, but my parents are Argentinian. My wife is from Venezuela. Obviously, I'm American. All Puerto Ricans are Americans. So I have very much that. I lived a while in France. So all that's kind of in that mix. And I like to celebrate that. I like to celebrate that mix. And this is something I took from a colleague where I co-presented, because I find a sort of what you do with that, what you do that mix. And this is a program up in upstate New York where they let immigrants participate in different kind of cultural activities. And Ru Ray, the person you see here, is from Indonesia, and his hobby was to make flutes out of bamboo. And then in upstate New York, well, he went foraging in his local Home Depot and got, with PVC piping, he created his flute anyhow. So that sort of resilience and the adaptability and transition into your new environment is kind of like sort of the engine behind my the work, and I think what I like to celebrate. So bringing that into the design world, one of the first things that you sort of land in when doing exhibits for diversity is the exhibit going to be bilingual? And so 21% of households in the United States speak another language at home. That's not necessarily Spanish. That could be Chinese, that could be Russian, Hebrew, all sorts of languages. So that's 1/5 of the country. And my house is like that. We speak Spanish. Though my stepdaughter speaks back to me in English, but we mostly speak in Spanish. Then I want to share this a little bit. Perhaps some of you know this report is the Berry report, which made a study about why doing bilingual exhibits. I suggest you also look for it. It's the Bilingual Exhibit Research Initiative. It's already got some years to it, and I think it's from 2013. But I've used it as a kind of model for my own work, and I'll show you. These are some of the points, some of the key points that it explains, and I will show that in some of my work how I've incorporated into it. Okay, are we still seeing my slides good? Because sometimes my screen switched around, so I wondered.
Yeah, this is good.
Okay, so well, first and foremost, it gives access to content to the entire family. Usually the older part of the family, grandpa and grandma, chances are that their English is not so good. The parents might be kind of in an in-between space, and then the kids usually speak fluent English. But to have the content there gives access to everybody. That's straightforward and simple. But what that does is and to have it just in time, by that I mean that both languages are present in the moment, it allows the parent to be a facilitator. They could play that role with their kids. So they could read it in Spanish or in Chinese and then share it with their kids. And that's something that they like to do. It's a kind of an emotional connection and part of the experience of going to an exhibit. Then it also brings, having both languages present, it creates a kind of cultural and emotional connection to that institution in a kind of let's sort of say in your branding, you are connecting with these audiences. They care for me. They have included my language in there. There's also a situation that people like to are learning a new language, and so oftentimes they read the language in English, and then they try it and they read it back in Spanish to see if they got it. And that's part of the experience too. this is an example from Puerto Rico. Actually, over there in Puerto Rico, it's curious that there's there's a little bit of a reverse immigration where Puerto Ricans from the United States move back, often to retire, but then those Puerto Ricans don't speak Spanish, they speak English. And so, so they have to learn Spanish. So over there, we also use bilingual text. And then about, this notion of being on the fence, and there's this term called code switching, and that is how you switch from languages from one back to another, depending on your audience. This could also be code switching, like, the way you talk to your buddies is different to the way you talk to your mom. But in language, it also happens as well, and switching back and forth. And so in this, the example you see here, I'm sort of celebrating the code switching. This is the title wall, and the title of the exhibit was called Gateways and Portales in Espanol. And so as you walk by, you get to see it, it switches from one language to the other. So I want to sort of celebrate that. I was lucky enough that the Gateways and Portales have the same amount of letters. So I used that as an opportunity. Then I like to give some tips. Sometimes when you're bilingual, you get too much text and it fills up your walls. And so I use sometimes panels in order to mitigate that issue. In this case, I also had a curator that liked to write a lot. And so we did these panels so people can pick it up, and there's less problems of legibility. They could see it up close and read it. So sometimes panels, pick up panel. This is done with a very durable, high pressure laminate. It takes a beating. Also, you got to delve into this bilingualism, and that's why I was calling it designing bilingualism instead of calling it bilingual design. I think you have to sort of get into that groove of being in that space of the both languages, and then you come up with solutions. Here's a brochure I did for a Museum of Chinese in America, and the solution here was that the English column is wider than the Chinese because the space it takes is more than the Chinese. And so if we wanted both texts to align as the pages go by, this adjustments allows for that. And so it was a little design invention, and it worked. So I invite people to get into that. Okay, so how does it support me? How do I support the community? I kind of see it as a two-way street. And I'm offered here a little clip from McKinsey & Company that says, those who support gender diversity are 21% more likely to have to be above average profitability, and the same with ethnic and cultural diversity. They have a 33%. So it benefits everybody to sort of be conscious of it. The demographics are changing, and to have that agility to go in different directions in order to attain those audiences is very important. In museums, it's been troubling. There's been a drop in visitations while the population has grown. This is an exhibit I did in El Paso, and it was a kind of a turning point for me. And I learned from this. There is a public history, so they go into the community and they ask people, what happened during that time that they were studying. This was an exhibit about the history of the city itself in different communities. So I said, oh, gee whiz, I like that. I want to do that myself in the design process. And so, I started looking for artists and artisans to help me out to the exhibit from the community. And so I got the Sanchez brothers to help me out. This gate, gates are ubiquitous all over El Paso, or ironwork. In Spanish, we call them rejas. There's not quite a translation for that. And they're also decorative. And then Semi, who's an artist, he's done murals all around El Paso and works with different high schools. And so we did we incorporated their work into, and then they themselves become ambassadors to the exhibit, and they tell about it. And then they see themselves clearly in the exhibit. And that's one of the murals. One thing that we did here was that the mural is part of the exhibit. It incorporates itself into it. We put actually a part of the timeline that we have there right in front of it. And I told the artist, that's the way we're going to have it right there. And instead of treating the art sort of autonomously and separately, like in an art museum, you have it on the white wall, here we mesh it in. And so it's part of the exhibit itself. Then another point is that it's something I've seen through my own experience in Puerto Rico. There's not that many museums in Puerto Rico, so people don't have that experience of going to museums often so much. And so the notion of what you do in a museum is a little bit obscure, you know. And it's also, and another thing I have is that I think most exhibits are done for college graduates. They're sort of formatted for that, so you understand well what the exhibit is about, because the labels are written for, you know, college level folks. And so I want to create an inviting space, a big idea that allows everybody to say, no, wait a minute, there's a gesture here that I get and I could start participating already. And so all exhibits should have a kind of big idea to invite people in. And this is an exhibit on Chinese food in the Museum of Chinese in America. So here, there's a table and you're invited to sit down at the table. On the sides, we have video and we have different chefs talking about their food. And then the curator, smartly enough, had an artist come in and do ceramics inspired on food of different regions of China. And so, and they're able to, it's also very contemporary kind of stuff. So it was an interesting way of doing. He also did co-creation with these artists as well. Then here, another exhibit that was called Gateways. You already saw the title piece. So I made big gateways all along, you know, the exhibit, so that the concept is clear. There's 3 sections to the piece. There are 3 gateways, and another thing that I learned from this particular curator, Ariana Curtis, and she's wonderful, is, you know, with my design background, you know, we're taught the Bauhaus way, at least, you know, when I went to university, also strict. But in the Latino culture, you know, festivity and celebration is seen as community empowerment. And so that kind of sort of let me think that, you know, I don't have to be so like almost embarrassed of being so festival and so being happy about it. That I should be more Bauhaus and strict, you know, that's kind of like design culture. So I'm moving my design sensibilities to, no, wait a minute, let me be, you know, happy when I design. And then also the big idea to provide context. This was for the Museum of Chinese in America. We created this kind of apothecary from the 1880s. We created this sort of spaces through it. In the most economic of means, using these kind of screens. And here I'm working on the Museum of Coffee in Panama, where again, we use bean bags and sort of to create a kind of quantifiable story of how much beans does Panama export. In a quick and, you know, simple way for everybody to understand. Okay, and so how does how does lived experience improve some of the things I do in my work? I'm going to do a little bit of a turnaround here and go to a slightly more fundamental kind of question. As I've been doing this, I've been sort of rethinking my design process and how does it affect my work? And typically, you know, at an exhibit or any kind of project is done multidisciplinary way. That would be the diagram on the left here. You have exhibit or project with all the experts all around, all putting their input, right? Graphic designers, engineers, architects. Then there's a more integrated kind of way, the interdisciplinary, so that when you mesh the two, and I kind of identify with that a bit. Graphic design and architecture, you get exhibit design, and so to speak. And then from Stanford, we're now getting sort of the design thinking, which focuses on the timeline of design, the process of design. And what I liked about that part is the sort of empathy, where you where you discuss who the audience is or what the client needs in a kind of in a deeper way. And I thought that related in many ways to my process. So I take that and I think of it as transdisciplinary design. Okay, and it's a little more simple than what it looks here on the screen. And I would say it's stakeholders are on top. That would be the artist and different people of the community. Design team, that's everybody from me and then the client. And then the project's in the middle. And through a design process of prototyping, of communicating, with empathy and ideation, we start creating a project. So it's a to and flow. And I feel that this project here I'm working on, it's for the National Museum of American History, the Molina Family Latino Gallery in Washington, D.C. We incorporated many of these ideas. And it's kind of like the co-creation of inviting artists, but it's a little bit deeper in, and I'm into my process. For instance, I invited Isabel Urbina, who does hand lettering, and we want her to do the titles of the different sections. My concept here was called Focalization, which is where you make apparent the point of view where it's speaking of. So I wanted to make visual the point of view of the history that we're speaking here in the Latino, so the Latino one. And so handwriting was key. And these are some of our initial sketches we were working on. We're only using this for the titles, not obviously the text, we can't use this, it would be not very legible. And here we're incorporating into our title panel, along with ironwork that's going to be incorporated in it. And then this is the entrance to the gallery. So we have this on the left, you see there, her panel. And in the middle, we have a digital experience that actually somebody comes and welcomes you on the screen. But we mix the two, the old with the new. Then I also invited this architect. I actually went to school with him in grad school. He works in the Southwest, and he looks at traditional ways of building through Adobe, but then he gives it a twist with digital printing. So I like that. I like that sort of re-signification of using traditional material culture that belongs to Latinos in the Southwest, but then changing it through a computer 3D printing. And so we're still working with him. This is in process. This is what his presentations look like, these kinds of things, sort of computer with sort of traditional and more pop culture work. And then we're working on this wall right now. That's going to be a sort of a piece that's in the mid. We have a plaza in our exhibit, and this is one of the walls at the sort of bookends of this. Then we also invited Rafael Lopez, an illustrator from San Diego. He's done a lot of mural work around San Diego and does a lot of illustrations. And so we're doing this, we call it this chandelier or kind of exploding piñata in the education lounge. And he's going to be doing the illustrations for that. And then here's some of the, right now we're doing some color studies here, sort of larger areas. And the images you see below are some of his illustrations that are going to be incorporated into it. The education curator and the other curators have a say in what goes up as well. And so they help, curate the selection. And then he's doing portraits. Self-representation is a big one. We've always had a kind of history told by somebody else. We want to tell our history ourselves. And so the images too have to be sort of, we choose how we represent ourselves. And so that's and so this is part of the reader rail, and we have different personal profiles of different people in history, of Latino history. And that's going to be incorporated into the cases. It's what you saw goes in the bottom kind of portion there of that case, and it's illuminated. These are computer renderings of what's coming up. And then this takes me to an even different area, but it's related in that empathy and in trying to look for inclusion and diversity. And in this museum, if we want to be about inclusion and diversity, then we have to be about everybody. And so we made a great effort in also making the space accessible. And so the same processes of transdisciplinary design apply here. And so we created a kind of a group, a team of people, of folks would have different disabilities who help us design the space. And here we see, I show pictures of mock-ups. And then we taped on the right, there's some taping, there's tape on the floor of the different elements. And actually there we have a problem. It's too small. The wheelchair won't go through. So we had to adjust that. And then we had a kind of a table on the left made out of foam core, and with testing if the reach is good. So that experience then spills into other areas. And then we also tested all our panels. These are people with low vision or no vision whatsoever. So the people with low vision, we tested how, if they could read the panels. And there's all the audio devices. The folks doing all the kind of interactive aspect of it are working on audio devices to help as well. So we're trying to be inclusive with everybody. And so that's how, and I think this is all the best for all the institutions to work this way. I think, designing for the Latinx, as you say now, Latinx community has broadened my design scope and process in a way that I can make the space more visitor centered, and make the institutions reach out to these communities better by including these kinds of processes in our work. Okay.
Mariano, this has been fascinating. You've really made us think a lot about not only a different design process, but different outcomes from various cultures. I really appreciate that. And I hope we can package all these presentations together and share them after the session. We'll be doing a report. So thank you. If we can stop sharing screen for Mariano and bring Dean up. We have a few minutes, and going to sort of reintroduce Dean Watanabe from Fresno Chaffee Zoo. And Dean is kind of representing the sort of owner perspective, maybe. And I'd be interested in your reflections, Dean, and how you see this whole design process and diversity. Thank you. Thank you, Mariano.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. And thank you to Mariano and from Ana. So yeah, I think that's the first thing I have to say. I'm not a designer, and I don't claim to be a designer, but I have had the pleasure of working with Ana for the last few years on this project. And, I wanted to start just by sharing something I don't share often, which is how my identity has kind of tied into this, or really drives a lot of the work that I do. In addition to being at Fresno Chaffee Zoo, I'm also on AZA's diversity committee. And I'm a third generation Japanese American. And in 1942, my grandparents and my uncle were interned for 4 years at Manzanar and Tule Lake. And to me, it is the worst case scenario of what happens when people don't have a voice. And I think that, that drives a lot of what, my thinking. And as I started to work with Ana on this project in particular, how do we give people a voice, and how do we use the zoo's reach and our audience to be able to make an impact in our community? In Fresno, we're very unique. We're the only large cultural institution in the Central Valley in California, and so we serve as a zoo, but we also serve as a lot of other things, and so we have an opportunity here. So that's how my identity has driven this process and working with Ana. And I just, really briefly wanted to talk about the benefits that we've had of working with Ana and working with diverse voices in the design process. And first of all, working with Ana, she brings an incredibly different perspective. And we often, I think, whether we're in the zoo world, formerly I was in an aquarium, the aquarium world, we get stuck that things have to look a certain way or have to be told a certain way from a certain perspective. And one of the great benefits of working with Ana has been that she doesn't think that way. And she's been open to new perspectives. And I will say that the process that we've been going through that Ana spoke about, working with the Southeast Asian community here, is an exhausting process because it's not linear. We don't get all the voices in the room at the same time and make one decision in one day. And being able to work with someone who is willing to see the outcome and to see where it's going has been incredibly worthwhile for us as an organization, because in the end, we'll not only have an exhibit that's immersive and beautiful and a great environment for our animals, but will also be something that's really beloved by our community and really driven by our community. So, you know, the last thing that I would just say is, you know, when I was speaking about preparing for this with Chaffee is, you know, how do we turn intention into action? We all want to have exhibits that have this reach and that are able to accomplish all the goals that we set out from the beginning. And, you know, more and more, particularly in this last year, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion have become something that we're all aspiring to. But how do we actually do it? And I'll just say that, you know, for museums, zoos, aquariums, these exhibit designs, capital projects, this is our chance to demonstrate our cultural competence, right? If we really want to be able to say that we listen to our communities and that we are who we are when it comes to DEAI, our exhibits are one of the primary ways to put our money where our mouth is. And that comes with who we work with and what those outcomes are. And then the last thing that I'll just say is that, you know, when building your diversity program within your organization, remember that it's not just your staff and volunteers, it's not just your guests, but it's who you work with. And it's the folks that, to Anna's point at the very beginning, who you give a chance to if they're not on the usual list of people that everyone works with, and how do you bring in that diversity of voices into your process. So I'll just end by just saying thank you for letting me be a part of this, and I appreciated hearing from both Mariano, and I appreciate working with Anna, and I'll turn it back over to Anna and Chaffee.
Okay, and I'm just going to wrap things up here. I wanted to thank our panelists. We do have a couple questions in the chat room, I see, and I have the feeling we could go on and on, but you have really helped, all of you, the three of you have helped change my thinking about this process and how much more the process is important, equally as important as our deliverables, as our outcome. Do we have other questions here? The last one I saw was from Kim. She noted, how do we change the culture within our AZA community? We are always deadline driven, and we really need now to put more on the front end and less maybe on the back end. Any observations or other questions? We have a couple of minutes. Do any of our panel want to respond to that? How can we change our model here to take the time to do it right? Mariano.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't work within, I work from outside an institution. So, but I think it's a matter of also of the people, making sure that people inside the institution are also diverse, and allow those folks to have a kind of a participation into the discussions of whatever project that they head into. It will be very difficult if you don't have, you know, that diversity inside to reach that point. And then, you know, you have to allow for another kinds of sort of, you know, processes. I would say design thinking is something that goes not only just for actual like physical projects like an exhibit, but any kind of sort of programming or any kind of, you know, project that you may have. Including your educational program, something like that. And how do we do it that it responds to the client and to the audience? And by being empathetic and inviting those people in, I think that's how you start seeing an evolution. So I would suggest that my way.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple observations as we wrap up, and apologize. We could go on and on. This has been exciting. It has absolutely exceeded what were my high expectations. I would encourage you all to think about a values-driven approach. I think you were just alluding to that, Mariano and Dean, when you were speaking. If we don't value this process and value the outcomes that inclusion can bring us, our process is flawed from the outset. So I would think about your personal values, your organizational values, and how they influence this process. The other thing I would like to leave you with is I'd encourage you to really embrace co-design, the idea of design thinking, but co-design. Pick your partners, whether, as you said, it's an education program, retail selection, or actually design. You'll get so much further by working with your community and various stakeholders. Wanted to thank the panel, and we have just one last slide here, Zach. This was an extraordinary day. We will pack things up, and we promise we will send you some outcomes. We'll try to capture the excitement and the innovation we talked about today. So look for a report on today, some takeaways that we made a note of. And I hope you will put this on your calendars. We're doing another webinar in 2 weeks. This is still another format. Today's format was a little bit different than we've done in the past. On April 8th, we've invited 6 leaders. Some people you haven't heard from in a very long time. Some are new to their leadership roles, but they all represent the breadth and diversity of our community. We're going to do a lightning round, 6 leaders. We're giving them an hour. You'll have a little time as audience for input and questions. We've asked them each to share 10 takeaways, 10 leadership tips that they have learned in their careers that they think might help other people. And we will certainly invite the rest of the community to participate in that as well. So with that, I want to thank you very much for being with us. And I can't wait to get to a museum or a zoo again. It's been more than a year for me. I've been safe. So thank you all for taking the time.
Thank you,
well.
everybody. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Dean and Mariano.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
This
Anna.
was great.
Great.
Thank you.